I studied for step 2 in a week and a half, and it really pushed me to my limits. Especially now that there's more pressure to ace step 2, because I think in 2022, step 1 went past fail. So now step 2 is the primary metric that residency programs are looking at to determine who they're going to give an interview. So step 2 is a really big exam now. So why the heck did I choose to take it with only a week and a half of studying? Why did I do this to myself? And how did I do it, just in case you are also in a situation where you need to take step 2 quickly? Keep watching the video to find out. Just as a brief overview as far as what is step 2, the USMLE Step 2 CK is the second of 3 United States medical licensure exams. The CK stands for clinical knowledge, and people usually take this exam between their 3rd and 4th years of medical school, after they've already completed all of their core clerkships. Unlike step 1, which is more focused on the basic science and the basic medical knowledge, step 2 is a lot more focused on the clinical applications of those things, as well as management of different medical conditions. So I wanted to start off by telling you guys a little bit of the backstory of why I did this. Most medical students and most of my classmates take about a month off in their 4th year of medical school, right in the beginning, to study for step 2. So that way they can have ample time to really review all the concepts and just be able to do as best as possible. So they usually take this month off in about August, and usually take their exam in August or maybe early September. However, the timeline might be a little bit different if you go to a med school that isn't 2 plus 2. For example, if they do like only a year and a half of preclinicals, but the majority of med schools are 2 years preclinical, 2 years clinical. But generally people take step 2 after they've finished all their core clerkships. So it was a little bit different for me because I knew as an M3 that I was interested in applying to an early match specialty. And the early match specialties are urology, ophthalmology, more recently plastic surgery, as well as the military match. And the military match consists of basically every specialty. So unlike most programs who I believe's application deadline was September 25th, my applications were due as early as August 30th, but generally most were due on September 1st, depending on the program. Either way, much earlier than everybody else. And my M3 year ends in mid-July, and then we have about a 2-week break before M4 starts in late July. So the problem was for me that I needed to spend that rotation block of late July to basically the end of August. I had to spend that block doing my home program rotation for the specialty I'm applying into, because my specialty is not a core clerkship and my school does not allow us to do electives as an M3. So I really needed to get this rotation in so that way I could get letters of recommendation on time, because again, I needed these letters in by the end of August. And the thing about my home program rotation is that I really need to give it my all, more than any other rotation I've ever done, for a multitude of reasons. Number 1, because I need to impress that program so that way I could get a strong letter of recommendation, not just a mediocre letter of recommendation, and also to develop relationships with the program as well. And also because I really needed to learn the skills, considering I hadn't done a full rotation in this specialty prior, and my specialty has a very steep learning curve because they barely cover it in medical school. So I really needed to get these skills, get them quickly, and be able to do well enough to be impressive, and also to lay the foundation I need to be able to perform well on my away rotations. And I actually recently, last week, made a video on away rotations if you're interested. Long story short, I really needed to be in a space where I could give my home rotation my all, and studying for step 2 just couldn't be in the plans for that. Also, the class above me, the people who matched in 2024, who were the first set of people to apply for residency with step 1 being pass fail, I talked to a couple of people who were in my specialty, alum of Howard, currently interns. I asked them what they would redo if they could do their match cycle and do M4 over again, and one of them said he wished he took step 2 earlier, because the people who were in the same situation application as me, they weren't able to end up taking step 2 until like February after the match. And I really didn't want to be in that position. So I knew it was possible to match without step 2, but I wanted to be able to keep all of my options open and to not close any doors by not having a step 2 score on my application. So I decided that it would be preferable for me to have my step 2 score on my application, but that score had to be good. And after really thinking about all of my options, the only way I could really have my cake and eat it too, so that I could have step 2 out of the way and have it on my application, but also be able to get stellar letters of recommendation, my only real option was to take step 2 in the 2-week break between my M3 and M4 years, which was really more like a week and a half, because in that time period I had my senior orientation, which was mandatory. I had to go to my sister's white coat ceremony, and I also had doctor's appointments, hair appointments that I had to squeeze in for like my senior photos, and just to keep up with my health. Long story short, I only really had a week and a half to study in order to do everything I needed to do before my September 1st deadline. So I decided to make it happen. I knew there was a possibility I could be burnt out because I didn't get a real break between M3 and M4. I knew that I might have to study 16 hours per day to pull this off. I knew that this would be a huge feat, and my dean actually advised against it unless I could really plan things out longitudinally. But for the sake of my peace of mind as an M4, and for the sake of being able to successfully match where I want for residency, I chose to make it happen. And I will definitely say studying for step 2 definitely challenged my mental health, definitely challenged my overall well-being. But thankfully, I had a level of mental resilience because I was able to start working on building my mental wealth. It's almost like a savings account of building certain habits, so that way when times of trouble come, you're able to face that challenge, you're able to focus, and you're able to accomplish your goals. And mental wealth primarily consists of getting adequate sleep, having a healthy diet, exercising, stress management, as well as taking some exogenous compounds to help you stay healthy, such as vitamins, etc. And this was definitely something that I really had to build as an M3, because for a good chunk of that year, I was eating 1 meal a day, if even, not sleeping, and I was really pushing myself to my max. But one day I had to sit down with myself and realize that this is not sustainable. So in order to build the correct habits I need in order to be able to function and study for step 2, especially when I got very little break before I had to study for step 2, I really had to be intentional about improving in those things. And one thing that has been of great help to me in improving my mental wealth has been Magic Mind. And Magic Mind is a productivity shot or a mental performance shot that has really helped me to be more productive. It really helps me to improve my focus and have a clear mind, so that way I can really just study in a low stress, high focus state. It almost puts me like in a flow state or like a Zen mode. And I noticed that the effects increase as I take it more consistently, because it's not a quick fix like caffeine is. Rather than just blocking the receptors that tell you that you're sleepy like caffeine does, Magic Mind actually helps stimulate ATP production in your body, the energy source of your body. And it includes several ingredients that are backed by over 200 scientific studies to help you reduce stress as well and have improved mood. And I've been using the productivity shots for years, but I also more recently tried out the sleep elixir. This is it. And the sleep performance shot has really helped me sleep a lot faster, especially now that I'm in the process of finalizing my rank list and I've been tossing and turning over things regarding that. This has definitely helped me to sleep better and to wake up feeling a lot more refreshed and a lot more ready to take on the following day. Because again, sleep is something you really need to be able to be in the proper mental space. So if you're interested in trying out Magic Mind, click the link in my description. I'll also display it on the screen. You can get 45% off a combination of the productivity shot and the sleep elixir. So feel free to check them out. So How did I study for step 2? I got my handy dandy iPad, so I'm going to be sharing some of the notes from here. And I first want to start off with the things that I did not do. And some of these things I did use to study for step 1, however with step 2, especially when I had very little time, I did not do these things. I did not do Anki. I really didn't use it at all during M3, to be honest, just because balancing with clinical rotations, I just didn't have the time for it. But I do know a few people did, but I definitely did not use it during step 2 dedicated. Another thing I did not use, y'all, I did not use first aid. First aid does have a book for step 2, but I didn't use it. I feel like if I had a full month to study, I may have considered it, but that just wasn't my story. Another thing I did not use was Pathoma, y'all. I loved Pathoma for step 1, but I just don't think it's as relevant for step 2. But the knowledge I gained from Pathoma for step 1 definitely helped. But they're not really showing us too many histology slides on step 2. Another thing I did not use was Boards and Beyond. I actually don't know if they have a course for step 2, but it just wasn't really a resource I had used at all during M3, really, to be honest. And another resource I did not use for step 2 was Sketchy. However, I will say that the information in Sketchy is still moderately relevant for step 2, but I think I just learned it well the first time, and I did my Pepper Deck Anki with the Sketchy the first time, so the things that I need to know still carried over mentally for M3, but it just wasn't something I really had any time for or need for during my step 2 dedicated or during M3. But I want to thank all of these resources for pouring into me for step 1, but I left y'all in 2023, unfortunately. But I will tell you guys the primary resources I used for step 2, how I studied for step 2. And like I just alluded to, one of the biggest things that served me and allowed me to be able to study for step 2 in such little time was the foundation I had built. In 2023, I posted a video on how I studied for step 1. I'll put it up here, and that was actually my most popular video on my YouTube channel. So if you watched that video, you may remember that I said that you shouldn't just study to pass step 1, but you should study to do as well as possible, as if it's still scored. And do you guys remember why I said that? I said because that is the foundation you lay for your entire M3 year and for step 2. And I definitely feel like that rang true. Of course, there are new concepts that you have to learn as an M3 for sure, but having that foundation from step 1 was definitely important. And I also tried to continue laying a strong foundation throughout my entire M3 year by trying my best to do as well as possible and learn as much as I could during every single clerkship, regardless of whether I was interested in it or not. I tried to do as well as possible on every single shelf exam, and thankfully I was able to honor all of my rotations. If you want a video on how I honored all my shelf exams and all my rotations, leave a comment down below. But I am very glad that I put that effort forth, because by the time I got to my dedicated for step 2, it was more so reviewing concepts that I already had a solid understanding at baseline of, rather than trying to learn too many things from scratch. Of course, there were a few things that I had to basically relearn or learn first and foremost during dedicated. For example, biostats was something that came up on step 2 that I hadn't really thought about in a year. And also step 2 has a lot of like social sciences, ethics, which just isn't as emphasized on the shelf exams as it is on step 2. So there were a few things I had to piece together, but it definitely was not the majority of the information. Another thing that I felt gave me an advantage, probably over some of my classmates when studying for step 2 in such a limited time, was the fact that I had internal medicine and family medicine as my last rotations. And this was such an advantage because internal medicine is basically half of the content on step 2. So having those things fresh on my mind definitely helped, and I was able to actually make a more longitudinal study plan. It was a combined family medicine, internal medicine, step 2 study plan. So even though I only had a week and a half of dedicated for step 2, I had really been preparing for this exam for 4 months or so in advance. And I will show you guys that study plan. So first I'll just share the primary resources that I used to study. Number 1 was UWorld. I also had access to Amboss, but I primarily used UWorld because it is the gold standard for USMLE studying. And I'm also someone who learns through practice questions, but I really don't think you can escape studying for your shelf exams for step 2 without using UWorld. If your school doesn't offer it for free, I know you have to pay it in tuition, but for free, I suggest you would find a way to pay for it out of pocket, honestly. The second resource is actually a YouTube channel called Divine Intervention. So Divine Intervention is some guy who at the time was a 4th year medical student at Hopkins, and he made shelf exam reviews. So I would suggest watching his videos on every shelf exam review, and he really goes over some of the highest yield content. Some similar channels that I also watched were Emma Holiday, as well as Dr. High Yield, but Divine Intervention was the main one. I will say Divine really carried me through my entire M3 year. Shout out to him. And the third resource I used was Online MedEd, which is a website that primarily has videos as well as some notes like summaries, but I primarily watch the videos on basically all things step 2. I would use Divine Intervention, especially in the subjects I was weaker in. If I saw that I was getting, for example, a lot of pediatrics questions wrong, I would go through, watch his pediatrics section. He was also really good for OB-GYN and honestly pretty good for everything. He really takes the time to teach you the pathophysiology of things as well as the clinical relevance, what labs you need to order, how you manage certain conditions. I would definitely say Online MedEd is a good initial learning resource. I always did UWorld alongside, but I think Online MedEd does a good job of laying the foundations. But I will say I more so use Online MedEd like throughout my M3 year rather than during my 1.5 weeks of dedicated. But it was pretty helpful. And the fourth resource I used were the NBME self-assessments. So these are on the National Board of Medical Examiners website. You log in and you're able to purchase some self-assessments that are similar in style. It's the same people who make your shelf exams. It's the same people who make step 2. So you get to see the things that the NBME finds pretty high yield. And I will say, even though I think UWorld is more representative for step 1, I think the NBMEs are actually the most representative for the shelf exams and for step 2, with the exception that I think some of the NBMEs are a little bit old and outdated, and step 2 has a lot of questions that are formatted like a SOAP note, or at least they're formatted like the subjective and objective. They don't have an assessment and plan, obviously. That's your job as the medical student taking the test. But I think UWorld simulates that a little bit better than the NBMEs. But step 2 was probably like a third questions that are formatted like the SOAP note. But yeah, as far as principles and the content goes, the NBMEs are probably the most representative. Those are really the main resources I used. It was primarily practice questions, YouTube videos, and a good amount of Online MedEd. The only exception, I think, for psychiatry, I went through the first aid for psychiatry book during my rotation, and for surgery, I went through the DiVirgilio's surgery book during my surgery rotation. And I think those books helped me lay solid foundations. I did not go through those again during dedicated. Okay, so for my study plan, I have it broken up into pre-dedicated. So this is me also trying to study for internal medicine and family medicine. And then I also have a section that's specific to my dedicated period where I was just going into studying for step 2. I have on the screen a copy of my step 2 CK study plan. If I highlighted it in yellow, it's primarily for step 2 CK. However, the pink font is more directed towards shelf exam prep. So if it's pink font and highlighted in blue, it's for internal medicine shelf. And if it's pink font and highlighted in green, it's for the family medicine shelf. So that's my key in color coding. So I started this study plan on April 7th with the intention to take step 2 on July 26th, which I did. I kind of had my schedule blocked out into a little bit over 1 month blocks during my internal medicine rotation. From April 7th, I was doing mixed UWorld blocks, all disciplines, but I had checked internal medicine, family medicine, ambulatory medicine, clinical neurology, and I think that's it. I think those are the subjects that I used for my integrated studying. And my goal was to get about 280 UWorld questions done per week, which comes out to approximately doing a block of 40 per day. I didn't always reach this, but I took the approach of shoot for the moon, and if you miss, you land amongst the stars. So this was what my plan was for the first month. And also, I took my first practice step 2 exam throughout the week of April 22nd to April 28th. And that's around when AMBOSS actually has its annual self-assessments. They do it for both step 1 and step 2. The step 1 one happens a little bit earlier, I think. During this week is when I took my first step 2 practice exam. And I'm glad I took it early because I was able to see, okay, where am I at? Am I on the right track? Is it even possible for me to do well on this exam in the next 3 months? So I took that exam, and I remember I passed, but I barely passed. If I remember correctly, I think I got a 220 something. I'll put it on the screen what I got on this self-assessment, but thankfully I was able to increase my score by 30 plus points. I had noted for myself that I wanted to still complete the 40 questions per day while I was taking the AMBOSS self-assessment, which was it was 4 blocks of 40, I think, but I wanted to still do 40 UWorld questions per day. I don't think I accomplished that. I honestly don't. Had I done that, I would have only had 813 UWorld questions for the subjects I selected by May 12th. And this May 12th, May 13th is around when I started my next block, which was wards. Regardless, I said that on May 11th, I am taking my first actual NBME-based self-assessment for step 2. And I chose to do Form 9, but I did this because I wanted to see early on, okay, how am I progressing now that I've done a good chunk of the UWorld? So for my next block, I was going to be on wards. And wards is known to be pretty demanding, internal medicine wards. The patient's got a lot going on. And I should have noted, during this time period, I was either on my family medicine rotation or a neurology rotation, which was known to be a little bit more relaxed as far as how much time you have compared to wards. I will not say my family medicine rotation was relaxed, but neurology was definitely better. So because of the increased demand, I decided to try to just aim for doing about 30 UWorld questions per day at this time, and I think this was a little bit more realistic. With this being said, I should have been able to finish my first pass of UWorld by June 8th, with the exception of whatever questions I had left over from pediatrics. And I had also planned to rewatch Sketchy Micro, which I will be honest, I did not do. But honestly, I don't think I needed to because I felt like I had it pretty solidified in my head. Especially for the ones that were more clinically relevant. So now we're in a different block of internal medicine. I finished wards. Now I'm on subspecialties, which was definitely less time demanding compared to wards. I was doing hem-onc and nephrology. So I went back to my 40 questions per day, but this was my last block of internal medicine. As you can see, it ended mid-July. So I had to keep in mind studying for all of these shelf exams, and that's kind of what I was shifting my focus more into. July 5th, I had a neurology exam. July 8th, I had a family medicine exam. And on July 12th, I had an internal medicine exam. As you can see, not much time between these. So I had to make sure I adequately planned to be able to honor all of them. So for June 9th to June 29th, I continued doing my integrated subjects UWorld every single day. But I had said, okay, on June 15th and June 29th, both of which were probably Saturdays, I'm going to complete NBMEs for the internal medicine shelf. That way I can start being exposed to the internal medicine specific things that are tested quite often. In the week of June 30th to July 7th, I started wanting to focus on studying for family medicine and neurology, because I didn't really have like a significant amount of time break to study for those. However, I think I had 3 to 4 days before in between to study for internal medicine without other commitments. During this week, I wanted to complete all of the family medicine NBMEs, and my goal was to do 10 pediatrics UWorld questions per day to catch up on the fact that I didn't finish my peds questions during my peds rotation. And I say that because family medicine has everything, including pediatrics, including OB-GYN, including psychiatry, surgery, and a little bit. But family medicine covers everything. So during this time period, in addition to doing the NBMEs, I also wanted to review previous subjects to get those informations back in my head. That was hectic. Anywho, family medicine exams done, honored it, yay. Now I got like 2-3 days to study for internal medicine. And thankfully I didn't have any clinical duties during these time periods. My primary goal was to complete the remaining internal medicine NBMEs, which there were a lot of. So that's what I focused my energy in. And I also watched Divine Intervention to start getting information back in my head. I will warn you guys, for internal medicine, he has 10 hours worth of videos for the internal medicine shelf. After this hectic situation, yay, I finished M3. Do I get a break to study for step 2? No, I do not. Maybe I took like a day or 2 off. So what did I do during step 2 CK dedicated? Step 2 dedicated schedule. As you can see, I took 1 day off. And then right after that, I did another NBME. And I did NBME 10. I didn't review it this day, I just did it. I also blocked out time to work on my personal statement because remember, I have applications for residency due in a month. July 15th, I had a doctor's appointment in the morning, but I tried to make it early so that I would have time to do other things. So after that, I wanted to review the NBME I just took. I blocked out about 5 hours to do that. So now I'm getting back into my content review. Started off with the rotation that is furthest away from me, that being psychiatry. Psych was my first rotation, so I started off doing a review of psychiatry, primarily using Divine Intervention. This time period is how long the video is. Then I wanted to do 80 UWorld questions, random, all subjects, all disciplines. July 16th, I had a hair appointment at 9 a.m. because I was getting senior headshots the following day. Couldn't do much studying that day, but I wanted to do content review for surgery. Again, watch Divine Intervention. And I also hoped to spend some time doing UWorld. July 17th, I had my senior orientation. Even though I had a very full day, I still wanted to get something done. At night, OB-GYN review, Divine Intervention. And if time and energy permits, I wanted to do 40 UWorld questions. I did not do that. So after about 3 days of studying since my last NBME, I wanted to take the UWorld Self-Assessment 1. So this means doing it and reviewing it on the same day. And as you guys can see, like, I spent most of these days just doing practice tests. July 19th, I wanted to focus on catching up on peds, and I had my sister's white coat ceremony at 4, and I didn't even plan any other studying that day because I knew we'd probably go out to dinner and whatnot. So July 20th, I did NBME 11. July 21st, I did NBME 14, and July 22nd, I wanted to do 120 random UWorld questions and also dedicate about 2 hours for miscellaneous content review for subjects I felt weaker in. July 23rd, now my exam's in 3 days, did another self-assessment, UWorld Self-Assessment 2, and I think this may have been the practice test I scored highest on. And for July 24th, this is the day I chose to take the free 120. And if you watched my video for like the beginning of M4, you would have known that I was contemplating pushing my exam around here because some of my scores were up and down. So I used the free 120 to determine whether or not I'm going to take my exam or push the exam. But I did well enough to decide to take the exam. This day I also did some high yield content review, strengthening my weaknesses. And the day before my exam, I usually like to make it a half day. No practice questions, just doing high yield content review. So as you can see, this schedule is a little bit, but I think it got the job done. And I can't stress it enough, this 2-week dedicated schedule alone would not have gotten me where I had to get. I had to plan longitudinally, and I had to come in with a very solid foundation. Although my methods and timeline of studying for step 2 were very much unconventional, I hope this video helped you out and gave an idea of the resources you can use to study for step 2 and how to do it in a time crunch. And if you like this video, I'm sure you'd like my video that I mentioned earlier of the beginning of my M4 year. In this video, you watch me actually go through the process of all of this. Remember to check out Magic Mind, link in description. Give this video a like, thumbs up, subscribe, comment, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Adios.